So we are working our way through what's called the discipleship path. Now, the discipleship path has many steps on it, but they are not steps that we have to take in one order or another. In fact, many of you probably have your own stories of how you might have started on one step and it took you to another one that was different than the person even sitting next to you. So let me just review some of these steps. These are the ones that we are focusing on, and what this just really means is these are the things that Jesus has taught us that are how we are disciples. These are the things that we are to be doing to be the disciples Jesus has called us to be, in other words. So worship is one, prayer and devotion, service, which we're talking about today, small group, share your story, and tithing. Now, we started last week talking about service, and I did challenge you a little bit there to be praying each and every day, and I challenge you again to just continue to do that. Find one person at least every day, and maybe it's the same person every day, that's okay too, to be praying for how can you serve them? What is their need, and what is it that you, not somebody else, what is it that you can actually do about that? Because you know, one of the biggest things about talking of service is that Jesus really was the greatest example of servanthood, was he not? Right? Like, he gives us all these wonderful, wonderful examples of how to be a servant. And so I think it's really important for us to examine his life first, really learn how he was a servant and what that looked like, and then apply that to our own lives. It's there that I feel like we can really then take that into our communities. We can serve right here within our church. We can actually be the servants that Jesus has called us to be. So we're talking today about serving by faith. And this is a little bit of a subject that might take you hopefully to a deeper place and to a deeper understanding of serving. But if I were to ask you, what things has God done already in your life to develop your faith? I do believe many of you would probably tell me a story about a time when someone presented an opportunity to you to serve. Maybe that was to serve here in a ministry in the church. Maybe that was to serve in a ministry outside the church. Maybe it was to serve a family or one person, doesn't matter, but it was a time in your life when someone presented an opportunity for you to do something good for someone else. And after you had that conversation with that person, it likely didn't leave your mind. We know how God works sometimes, right? So I believe that once those things happen and God gives you an idea in your mind, it just doesn't leave. It just keeps coming to mind, and you keep thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. Now, it might have been, again, a ministry here in the church or somewhere else, but whatever it was, you just felt this inner nudge that you had to do something. You, not somebody beside you, but you had to do something to make a difference in somebody else's life. Now, you'd likely also tell me about how you were scared, right? That you felt like you had absolutely no experience to do that kind of serving, that you were so unprepared, that you went in with fear thinking that, you know what, I'm just going to probably fail and embarrass myself. But after you got into it, and after you started serving in that way that God called you, amazing things started opening up. God started doing amazing things, which now makes this a part of your faith story. Today I want to talk about that dynamic, that tension of fear, of doubt, when we all have in these kinds of moments. And one reason I want to talk about this so much today is because I bet to say, I really believe this, that there's somebody, if not more than one, and very likely more than one person in this room right now, who's having that tug-of-war battle, that wrestling match with God over what God is calling them to do and how he's calling them to serve. There may be a need that God just keeps bringing to your mind, that just keeps coming to your heart, a ministry, something in this church, something in the community, a person, doesn't matter, but something that God just keeps bringing up over and over and over again. And what I want you to understand today is that this issue in that wrestling match that you're having with God is not just about helping somebody in need. That's certainly part of it, certainly a big part of it. But likely, the bigger issue for you is that God wants you to do something that's not in your comfort zone. Something that is like you stepping out on a limb, right? Not a branch, but a really thin limb. And it sounds scary, it sounds fearful, right? But it's more about your faith than anything else. I've talked about this a couple of times in the past, and I'm just going to bring this back up because this is the best example I can come up with when we talk about faith. It's almost like building a muscle. Now, when you exercise, your whole goal for exercising, especially if you're weightlifting, is to wear your muscle out. You wear your muscle out, and then when you let it rest, it grows. Well, your faith muscle really isn't any different than that. God will often put you in places that will absolutely exhaust your faith. You think your faith has gone off the deep end, right? Like it's not coming back. It is exhausted. But then once you rest, guess what happens? Your faith starts to grow. Your faith starts to grow. This is God stretching us. This is God putting us in those uncomfortable places, taking us out of our comfort zones to build up our faith muscle and then to serve. And once we build up that faith muscle, even just a little bit, the next time God calls us to do something, well, it's already started. And we've already recognized that we can trust whatever God's doing and keep going further. And one of the best examples of this in the Bible is probably one of the most familiar stories in the Bible. It's in Matthew 14. And as soon as I start reading this story, I know you're going to go, oh, we've heard this one before. I know that story inside and out, right? But I want to tell you, and I want to challenge you a little bit to think about one statement that I'm going to share with you that Jesus says in this story that I really think is the best description of an idea of getting outside of your comfort zone, getting outside the box, than probably anywhere else in the New Testament, okay? You ready to hear what the story is? Matthew 14 starts, when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. Now let me just stop right here for a moment and explain what's happening, because this just kind of like jumps into the middle of something, right? What Jesus had heard was that his cousin John the Baptist, had been killed, okay? See, John was arrested by Herod because John kept preaching against Herod and his sister wife. Get that? Okay? Herod married his sister. That's what that means. And John is preaching against this. And Herod gets tired of it. His wife gets tired of hearing it. His sister gets tired of hearing it, whatever you want to call her, right? They get tired of it, so they arrest him. Eventually, they behead him and they kill him. And Jesus just got word of this. And so that is, because it's Jesus' cousin, obviously this is hitting home with him. And he wants to go privately. He wants to go to someplace solitary. And he wants to just mourn and take some time to reflect on this and to pray and to have time with his God, with his Father, to mourn John's death. But that doesn't work out so well. Poor Jesus. It doesn't work out so well because upon hearing this, all right, all sorts of people heard that Jesus was going somewhere by himself. He gets in a boat, he's heading out, and what do? They just walk around the lake from all over the place. All these people are so desperate to just hear Jesus. They're so desperate just to have a small piece of him, and they hear he's going to be by himself, well, they're immediately wanting to go. They want to go. They want to just go and hear from him and have him heal them and do all the great and wonderful things he's been doing. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Most of us would have just stopped right there. We would have just stayed in the boat as soon as we saw those people coming across the lake, and we would have just went the other way, right? We wouldn't have even got out of the boat, let alone given them compassion and healed their sick. As evening approached, getting late in the day now, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy some food." That sounds like a reasonable thing, right? That sounds like a very smart, wise thing to do. Now, I want to take note here because the disciples apparently also caught up with Jesus too. Did you pick up on that? Okay. I don't know if they walked around the lake too or if they went by boat, but they obviously caught up with Jesus as well. And I imagine by this point, as it's getting late in the day, the disciples are tired themselves. They might be a little hungry themselves. Maybe that's why they're thinking about this. But they knew that Jesus originally went out there to be by himself. He had shared that with them, I'm sure. He wanted to be by himself. He wanted to mourn his cousin. They knew this. So now they're out in the middle of nowhere. There's all these people, thousands of people have followed by. I mean, we're not talking a couple hundred or even just a small amount. We're talking thousands of people have come out. They're in the middle of nowhere. Jesus knows there's no food for any of these people, right? The disciples know there's no food for any of these people. So they say, hey, just send them back to the villages. Tell them it's time. I'm done. You guys need to go back so that you can eat. But this is where it gets really interesting. This is the statement that I want you to pay attention to, because this is probably the most powerful statement that describes us getting out of our comfort zones than anywhere else in the New Testament. This is how Jesus replies to their suggestion, okay? To their wise suggestion, mind you. I'm not discrediting them. It was a very good idea. But this is how Jesus answers. They do not need to go away. Okay, so thousands of people, they're going to stay right here. They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat, okay? Not them, you give them something to eat. Jesus knows it's getting late. Jesus very likely knows that the people are getting hungry, right? And we all can get a little grumpy when we're hungry. We know that, right? So Jesus knows this is a real thing, yet he tells the disciples it's not necessary for them to go away. Not at all. In fact, I want you to do this. I want you to do something. Now, this is the tension, though, because it looks like it's totally impossible. How in the world are we going to feed thousands and thousands of people? But this is the tension, and if you're not facing it now as a Christian, you will one day. I promise you that. If you're a fairly new Christian and haven't faced this yet, it's coming. This is the tension. This is the wrestling match that we have with God when God is calling us to meet a need, and it may not be a voice. It may be just a thought in your mind. It might be something laid on your heart. It doesn't necessarily need to be a voice, but God knows, and you know that there's a need. And somebody's got to take care of that, right? Somebody's got to step up and do it. Yet your reaction might be just like the disciples. In fact, I think we do this fairly often. We start making excuses, don't we? You know, we make these excuses. Now, something to consider that is different from our making excuses to the 12 disciples making excuses. When we make excuses, you know, we might be doing that in our prayer time, and it's pretty easy for us just to dodge the bullet. But if Jesus is literally physically standing in front of you like he was in front of the disciples, you're not dodging that bullet so easy, are you? You know, I don't think it's like the guys were like, nah, Jesus, we had a talk. We decided that's not for us. We're not doing that. No way, no how, right? That did not happen. Instead, they come up with this excuse. We have here, so apparently they looked, right? We have here only 5 loaves, okay? The loaves, I'm sure, are not very big. 5 loaves of bread and only 2 fish. Jesus, what can we do with that? Come on, right? This is all we have. This is our excuse. So in other words, we can't do it. We're not qualified. We're not prepared. We're not equipped. You've got the wrong guys. This just is not going to happen. And then Jesus says, and I picture the disciples kind of rolling their eyes or going, oh man, here he goes again, right? Bring them here to me, he said. And they're probably like, I have no idea why, but sure. You want them? Here you go, Jesus. Don't know what you're going to do with that, but here you go. It's like Jesus is telling them, and I think he says this to all of us, just bring me whatever you have. It doesn't matter how much it is. Just bring me whatever you have. And we use these excuses and we say, God, you know, I don't really know a lot about the Bible, so I certainly can't teach a Bible study. And he says, that's okay. Just bring me whatever you have. And we say, but God, you want me to teach the teens? No way. I can't do that. I'm too scared of them, right? Teens, don't worry. We're really not that scared of you. But I don't have the experience. I don't have the knowledge. And God says, that's okay. Just bring me whatever you have. Whatever you have. But what if they ask hard questions? It's okay. Just bring me whatever you have. Bring me all the fear you have. Bring me all the doubt you have. Bring me whatever you have. And I'm going to make it work. Right? And this is exactly what the disciples do here. So as much as we want to say, okay, they made excuses, they eventually just said, okay, Jesus, I have no idea what you're going to do. And they just go with it. They just go with it. Here's what he says. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass, with thousands of people sit down, taking 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks, he broke the loaves, and then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. If you're like me, I like to put this in like real life in my mind. I like to imagine what's actually happening. So I picture if Jesus is standing here, I picture all the 12 disciples standing in front of him in a line, right? And then behind him would be all the crowd, right? The whole 5,000 plus crowd. Scripture actually says it was 5,000 men plus women and children. So let's just be real. We could be talking 10, 15, 20,000 people. Who knows, right? All that crowd standing behind these 12 men. And Jesus breaks up the loaf. He breaks up the fish. He hands a little bit to each one of the 12, okay? And I imagine the disciples going, is this just my portion? Or what? Because basically, he's just handing back what they handed to him, right? 5 loaves, 2 fish aren't going very far between 12 men, let alone all those thousands of people. And at this point, the guys don't know what to do with that. They don't have any clue what to do with this. Like, what am I really supposed to do? So they just know that Jesus has got to be up to something, because this is Jesus, right? This is what he's done. They've experienced his miracles before. This doesn't make any sense to me, but if what I'm supposed to do is to turn around and just start serving people, even though I'm pretty sure if I give this only to a couple of people, there's going to be other ones who are mad at me, I'm just going to do it. And so what do? They turn around and they just start. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't understand it. Doesn't make any sense to the logic mind. But they just turn around and they start. They did only what they knew how to do. Only what they knew how to do. Hand out whatever's in their hand. Turn around and hand it out. And then trust. And here's the key. Trust that Jesus was going to do something else, that Jesus was going to do something with it, something so unusual that only Jesus could do, right? You see, your responsibility and my responsibility is real simple every single time. Every single time. No matter what excuses we want to make, no matter how hard it looks, our responsibility is real simple every single time. You must do what you know how to do. I must do what I know how to do. And then we just trust that Jesus is going to do exactly what he knows how to do and what his plan really is. The tension that you feel, the fear that you feel in these moments, that's your faith. That's your confidence muscle being stretched, being worked out. That's God exercising and growing your faith. The tension isn't just about our fear and our insecurity. It's so much bigger than that. You know, really what's on the line is your own faith. Okay, if we don't take that step forward, if we don't turn around and just start serving, just start doing what we know how to do, then our faith isn't going to grow. Which means that our intimate relationship with God isn't going to grow either. How do you get closer to somebody? How do you build a relationship? You start to trust them, don't you? Right? You build that by trusting them. It's also not just simply the needs that might go unmet, though. You know? Your faith is really at risk of not growing if you say no. If you just walk away and don't try. In fact, if you look anywhere in history, literally, I'm not just talking about the Bible. If you look anywhere in history from the beginning of time, God has always done amazing things. He's done it through missions, through organizations, individuals, any kind of church, anyone who has had an impact on anyone else in some spiritual way. Every single time, you will find someone who said, okay, God, okay. They didn't know the answers. They didn't know what it was going to look like. They didn't know how this was going to work out, but they just said, okay, and they trusted Jesus to do what they knew they couldn't do. Those are the same people who also give God glory for everything that's done, right? You probably know some of them. We have some in this church. Anytime something happens, that's all God, or all glory to God, right? They're the people who just say, okay, even though they don't know what's going to happen, and trust. This is how the story continues here. They all ate and were satisfied, which means they had enough, right? This wasn't just a little nibble for everybody. They had enough. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. I've often wondered, and I really don't know the answer to this, but were there 12 baskets because there were 12 disciples? Was it just that every single one of them had a basket and every single one of them got to experience a miracle that something was actually left over? It wasn't just barely enough. No, it was so much, so overfull that they all had leftovers. The number of those who ate was 5,000 men besides women and children. You know, the disciples were used to Jesus' miracles. They had seen Jesus' miracles before this story. There's no doubt about that, right? And this is not just a familiar story that, you know, because we've heard it in Sunday school so many times. This is an important story. And the reason I think it's such an important story, it has such a purpose to it that we really need to pay attention to here. Jesus wasn't just running out of ideas of miracles to do, right? He wasn't just trying to be creative. There's a purpose to this particular story. And as you read the New Testament, you hear that Jesus had this very specific agenda, right? He knew that his time was going to be short here on earth. He knew that he wasn't going to be here forever and that he was leaving everything to these 12 guys, to this group of people, to keep it going, to move it forward, right? He knew. He also knew that if their faith and their confidence in God was not strong, that would never work, would never work. So this whole miracle is to simply teach the disciples and us to trust Jesus. Do what you know how to do, and then trust Jesus with the rest. And as soon as this was over, I got to tell you a little bit more, continue just a little bit further in this story, because as soon as this was over, Jesus does this. Lesson 1 is done. Here comes lesson number 2, right in, right? The Bible says immediately, which means that these stories were tied together. This is all one story. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. I don't exactly know how Jesus dismissed a crowd of so many people, because if Jesus just fed me in such a miracle way, if Jesus was healing me and healing the sick people around me, I would not want to leave. I'd be willing to stay there all night long just to be with him, right? But he somehow dismisses them. And after he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside to be by himself to pray. Finally, he's getting his solitude time. But when evening came, He was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. So the disciples get back in the boat. They're heading out across the lake, okay? They know how to row a boat. They have done this all of their lives. Many of these guys are fishermen. This was second nature to them to row a boat, right? But it's getting dark out just when they left. So by the time they get out to the lake a little bit further, get a distance away, it's already pitch black. It's very dark, and all these waves are starting to hit them, starting to come up. And they've dealt with this before, I'm sure. But before you know it, they realize, we've been out here hours and hours, and we haven't gone anywhere yet. It's like we're stuck in the same spot, just rowing and building up our arm muscles at least, right? Just going and going and going. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. May I just take a sidestep here a second and say, one of the things that gives credibility to the Bible is stories like this. Because the guys who wrote this Bible don't make themselves look very good, do they? Right? I mean, we think of Matthew, Mark, James, John, Peter as like the superheroes, right, of faith of the Bible. And certainly, I get that. But when you look at how they describe themselves, I don't think if anybody was writing a story about themselves, especially to boast on themselves, they wouldn't show that they were such cowards, right? Wouldn't talk about themselves like that or talk about anybody else in that boat as such cowards. Yet, they said, it's a ghost, and they have all of this fear. All of this fear comes rattling in. But Jesus immediately said to them, he didn't waste any time, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." And in that moment, Peter has this epiphany. Peter's like, you know what? I think I'm starting to get this a little bit. I just think that by chance, you handed me a little bit of gooey fish and a little bit of bread, had me turn around and miraculously feed thousands and thousands of people with this little teeny bit of food, let alone having some left over. And then Jesus tells us to get into a boat and row out into the lake at dark, mind you. Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen, yet he told us to go anyways. He knew what would happen this whole time. So now that we're out here just rowing and working our muscles, this sounds like a bit of a lesson to me, another lesson. And Peter starts to realize that if he just asked Jesus, or if Jesus just asked him, I should say, if Jesus asked him to do something, and Peter is willing to just try it, do what he can do, that Jesus might have something else up his sleeve. So Peter decides to test this theory. This is really what's happening here. Peter is testing this lesson that he thinks he's learning. He says, "Lord, if it's you," and boy, I'm sure hoping it's you, Jesus, but if it's you, I love how he says it, tell me to come to you on the water. Whoa, tell me to come. Who would even think of that? That's a pretty cool stunt there. Okay, let's try this lesson out. Let's see this theory and see if it happens. This is so important, so please listen very carefully to this. Peter didn't just jump out of the boat and say, "It's okay, I trust Jesus." Right? That would be stupidity, right? That's not faith, that's just stupidity. It'd be like jumping off a cliff and say, "It's okay, Jesus is just going to catch me." That's not what he does. Peter understands that the lesson is that Jesus has to ask him first to step out onto the water, and then Peter will be able to do it. So whatever I'm not capable of doing, whatever he invites me to do that's out of my comfort zone, wherever he invites me to do things that just don't make any sense, if he is asking me, then it's okay to step on the limb. Then it's okay to step out of the boat. So Peter says, just invite me. Jesus, let's test this theory. Invite me, ask me. This is so dramatic. I just can imagine like this all going on in my mind and real person here. So Jesus says, "Okay, come, Peter, come." Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. Wow. I mean, did you put yourself in Peter's shoes in this story? Wow. It worked, right? That would be my first thought. But you know what Peter really did here? He did the same thing that he did with the bread and the fish. The exact same thing. He just said, "Okay, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to serve. Okay, I know how to get out of a boat. I know how to walk. I'm just going to do that. I'm going to do what I know how to do, and I'm going to trust that Jesus has got something else going on." I think it would be really great for us to all pray this prayer that Peter had. We can call it the Peter prayer, right? "Lord, please just invite me out of my comfort zone. Whoo, Ooh, anybody really want to do that? I know, right? I see some head shaking, no. But what if you did? What if you were just like Peter and said this prayer? Please invite me out of my comfort zone. God, I want you to use me in the lives of other people, but I don't want to come up with the idea. I want the assurance that it's coming from you. Because if you ask me to do it, then I know great and wonderful things are going to happen. So let's just see what can be done. You know, for some of you, I would bet to say, I really believe this, that he is inviting you right now to get out of the boat. To get out of the boat. You know how to walk, right? Get out of the boat and walk. And maybe it means volunteering in our children's department or in our youth, with a youth group, you know, with our youth. And you may say, you know, I don't know the first thing about youth, man. They scare me, they terrify me, they're gonna ask me hard questions. But you know what? You know how to walk down that hall. And you know how to sit in front of them and just love up on them. Every one of you know how to do that. And Jesus is going to say, just bring me whatever you have. It's okay. It's okay. And he could do amazing things with that. Is Jesus saying, come on? Is he inviting you to something? Because you know all you really got to do is say yes and just do what you know how to do. I want you to listen to how this story ends. This is very important. But when he saw the wind, this is Peter, when Peter saw the wind, he was terrified and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus didn't waste any time again. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. If you of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? I don't think this is Jesus criticizing or chastising Peter in any means. In fact, I picture this more like, and I don't know Jesus' tone, so I'm not trying to say I do, but I picture this more like Jesus reaching out his hand to help him and just saying, you were so close, Peter. You almost had it, Peter. You know, encouraging him. You were so close. But why did you doubt me? If you would have just kept that peace and not doubted me, you would have continued walking on the water with me, which would have been pretty cool, right? The very last line here says, and when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, truly you are the Son of God. Okay, you know, that whole fish and bread thing, that was pretty amazing. But now that you just did this, we know, we 110% know that you are the Son of God. And they all worshiped him. You may not realize this. I know some of you are fairly new to this church, and you might not realize this, but there was a group of people who one day felt a leading from God to build this building right here on this hill. And it started even before that, you know, to purchase this land was one big avenue, right? And then to build this church. They were down in town, they were running out of room, it was an old building, no yard, no parking, everybody had to park along the streets. And they felt God leading them to build this church, to do this. So you know what those people said? And maybe it wasn't every single person in the church, but there was enough leaders in that church who said, okay, God, okay. We have no idea how we're going to do this. We have no idea how we're going to take on this big debt and what this is going to look like. But if you are asking us, God, okay, we'll do what we can do, what we know how to do, and we'll trust that you'll do the rest. If you're enjoying a small group, if you're in any Sunday school class, there is somebody who said, okay to God, when God said, I want you to lead this. I want you to do this. They didn't have all the answers either. They don't know it all. I don't know it all. None of us do. But they were willing enough to say, okay, God, I'll do what I can do and let you do the rest. Trust you to do the rest. Anywhere you look where God is moving and doing great things, you're going to find somebody deep enough, you'll look down in there, you'll find somebody who said okay to God, who said yes. Aren't you glad someone said yes, right? We have an awesome building here, right? Aren't you glad someone said yes? Aren't you glad someone took the time to bring you to church or to invite you to know who Jesus is, to give you salvation, to help you through that? Maybe it was this awkward conversation. I don't know how you got here, how you got to know Jesus, but one way or another, aren't you glad someone said, yes, God, I will talk to them. Yes, God, I will invite them, even though it's uncomfortable, even though I don't know how to do that. I do know how to pick up the phone, though. I do know how to dial, and I'll invite them, and then you do the rest, right? Man, I'm sure glad somebody did that for me. I'm sure glad somebody did it for each and every one of you in this room. So here's the question. Where is God nudging you? Where is God? What is God laying on your heart that you just can't get off your mind, that you can't shake, you can't get out of your thoughts? What is it? What is it? You can try and make excuses. I know you can, but it's not going to go away. It's not. Because remember, this is a faith issue. God is trying to build your faith. Yes, it will benefit somebody else, and that's a wonderful, wonderful aspect of it. But God is really also trying to build your faith, to strengthen your faith. So are you willing to do what you know how to do and trust God that he can do the rest? Are you willing to know what you know how to do, and in the terms of serving, trust that God will do the rest? If we do, man, we could really learn some great, wonderful things, could we not? And then the next time when God asks us to do something, we'll already have this faith built up. But I'm not saying it'll always be easy then to say yes to God, because it might be something bigger next time. But boy, you're going to look back and say, yeah, you know what, I already trusted God with this, and it turned out awesome. It was so amazing. So yeah, I'm going to say yes to this. And then just keep seeing God do amazing things in our lives. It really, really is just an awesome piece. So it all comes down to serving, but it also comes down to our faith.